Imagine suiting up for war knowing you might get gassed. You're putting on a charcoal-lined rubber suit in 120-degree desert heat. Gloves so thick you can barely operate your weapon. Boots that make you stumble. And a gas mask that fogs up, restricts your breathing and makes you feel like you're suffocating. You're carrying atropine injectors, nerve agent antidotes, that you'll stab into your thigh if you start convulsing from chemical weapons. And you're told this is mandatory because Saddam Hussein will absolutely use chemical weapons on you, except he never does. You spend weeks preparing for a nightmare that doesn't happen, but the fear, that was very, very real. Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about the threat that terrified coalition forces more than Iraqi tanks or aircraft, chemical weapons. Saddam had used them against Iran in the 80s. He'd gassed his own Kurdish citizens at Halabja, killing 5,000 people in one day. Intelligence said he had tons of mustard gas, sarin, VX nerve agent, maybe even biological weapons. Every soldier deployed to Desert Storm expected to fight in a chemical environment. They trained for it. They carried protective gear everywhere. And they lived with constant fear that the next Scud missile, the next artillery barrage, would be filled with gas. Let me tell you what that psychological terror was like. The gear was called MOPP, Mission-Oriented Protective Posture. It came in levels. MOPP Level 1 meant carrying your gear. Level 2 meant wearing the pants and jacket. Level 3 added the mask and gloves. Level 4 was full suit, everything sealed, fighting in a contaminated environment. In the desert heat, MOPP Level 4 was torture. The suits didn't breathe. You'd be drenched in sweat within minutes. Dehydration was a constant risk. Heat exhaustion was common. Soldiers would lose pounds of water weight in an hour. The gas mask was the worst part. The M17A2 mask sealed around your face with rubber. You breathed through filters. Your field of vision was limited to what you could see through 2-eye lenses. The mask would fog up constantly in the heat. You'd be half blind, struggling to breathe, trying to operate weapons or drive vehicles while feeling like you were drowning in your own sweat. Training required you to spend time in MOPP4 so you'd be used to it. Soldiers hated that training. But the alternative, being caught without protection when chemical weapons hit, was worse. Every unit had chemical warfare specialists who monitored for agents. They had detection equipment, decontamination kits, protocols for treating casualties. Entire field hospitals were set up to handle mass chemical casualties. Thousands of atropine auto-injectors were distributed, spring-loaded syringes that would inject nerve agent antidote directly into your muscle. Soldiers carried them in special holders on their gear. If you showed symptoms of nerve agent exposure, convulsions, drooling, loss of muscle control, your buddy would stab you with atropine and hope it worked. The psychological preparation was intense. Soldiers watched videos of what nerve agents do to the human body. Horrifying stuff, convulsions, paralysis, suffocation as your muscles stop working and you can't breathe. The videos were meant to motivate soldiers to take chemical protection seriously, but they also created deep fear. Every alert, every time someone yelled gas, 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 the standard warning, soldiers' hearts would race as they scrambled to get their masks on. Those alerts happened constantly. Scud missile incoming, chemical alert, unidentified artillery fire, chemical alert, weird smell in the air, chemical alert. Units would go to MOPP4, seal themselves in protective gear, wait for the all clear. Sometimes the alerts were false alarms. Sometimes they were precautionary. But every single time soldiers went through the drill, mask on in 9 seconds or less, suit sealed, atropine ready, waiting to see if this was the moment they'd been dreading. Sergeant Tom Williams was with the 1st Cavalry Division during the ground war. He described a chemical alert during combat. We were in contact with Iraqi forces, taking fire, and someone yelled gas. We're trying to fight while putting on masks and gloves. You can't see well, can't hear well through the mask. Your weapon handling is clumsy with gloves. Meanwhile, you're wondering if you're already contaminated, if you're about to start convulsing. It was terrifying. Turns out it was a false alarm. but Williams said those 9 seconds of putting on his mask while under fire were the longest of his life. The Czechs sent a chemical warfare unit, the only coalition forces specifically trained and equipped for chemical decontamination. They set up stations where contaminated soldiers and equipment could be washed down. The Czechs never had to actually decontaminate anyone, but their presence was reassuring. If chemical weapons were used, at least there was a plan. The Czech unit became oddly popular. Soldiers would visit just to see the decontamination equipment and talk to the specialists, trying to manage their anxiety about the threat. Israel faced the chemical threat more directly. When Scud started hitting Israeli cities, nobody knew if they carried chemical warheads. Israeli civil defense distributed gas masks to the entire population. Families would seal themselves in rooms with plastic sheeting and duct tape when Scud alerts sounded. Children practiced putting on masks. The psychological trauma of sitting in a sealed room wondering if you're about to be gassed affected an entire generation of Israelis. The Daran Scud attack that killed 28 Americans created a massive chemical scare. The missile hit a barracks in the middle of the night. Soldiers who survived the explosion weren't sure if it was a conventional warhead or chemical. In the confusion and darkness, chemical alarms went off. Survivors were stumbling around in rubble, trying to help wounded comrades, and simultaneously trying to get their protective gear on. The terror of not knowing if you were breathing poison gas while rescuing friends, that stayed with survivors forever. It turned out to be conventional explosives, but for those first minutes, nobody knew. Intelligence about Iraq's chemical weapons capability was extensive, but also uncertain. Analysts knew Iraq had produced tons of chemical agents. They knew Iraq had used them before. What they didn't know was whether Saddam would use them against the coalition. Some analysts thought he wouldn't. Chemical weapons would give the coalition justification to escalate, maybe even use tactical nuclear weapons in response. Others thought Saddam would definitely use them as a last resort, especially if coalition forces threatened Baghdad. The threat was taken seriously at the highest levels. President Bush reportedly sent a message to Saddam through diplomatic channels before the war started. If Iraq uses chemical or biological weapons, the American response will be absolutely overwhelming, and may include weapons of mass destruction. Diplomatic language for "we'll nuke you." Whether Saddam received or believed that message is unclear, but Iraq never used chemical weapons during Desert Storm. Why didn't Saddam use his chemical arsenal? Theories vary. Maybe the threat of nuclear retaliation deterred him. Maybe coalition airstrikes destroyed his chemical storage and delivery systems before he could use them. Maybe his command and control broke down so badly he couldn't coordinate their use. Maybe he intended to use them only if coalition forces attacked Baghdad, which never happened. We don't know for certain. What we know is that the weapon everyone feared most was never employed. After the war, UN inspectors found extensive evidence of Iraq's chemical weapons program. Stockpiles of chemical agents, production facilities, artillery shells and bombs designed to deliver chemicals. Iraq had the capability. They just didn't use it. For coalition soldiers who'd spent weeks living with the fear of being gassed, this was both a relief and somehow anticlimactic. All that preparation, all that fear, for a threat that never materialized. But the fear had real consequences. Some veterans developed what became known as Gulf War Syndrome, a collection of unexplained symptoms including fatigue, pain, cognitive problems. Many affected veterans believed their symptoms were related to chemical weapons exposure. They'd point to chemical alarms that went off, to pills they'd taken as chemical prophylaxis, to oil well fire smoke, to possible low-level exposure. The medical community struggled to find clear causes. Investigations were conducted. Some studies found no evidence of chemical exposure. Others were inconclusive. The debate continues. The MOPP gear itself became controversial. Wearing it in extreme heat contributed to heat casualties. Some soldiers suffered long-term health effects they attributed to the charcoal lining in the suits or to anti-nerve agent pills they were ordered to take. Whether those pills, pyridostigmine bromide, caused harm is still debated. They were supposed to provide protection against nerve agents. Some veterans blame them for later health problems. The VA has recognized certain conditions as service-connected for Gulf War veterans, acknowledging something happened even if the exact causes remain unclear. The psychological impact of living under constant chemical threat shouldn't be underestimated. Soldiers weren't just preparing for possible chemical attack, they were mentally rehearsing their own deaths, imagining convulsing, choking, dying in agony. Every alert triggered that fear response. Even knowing rationally that most alerts were false, the body's stress response didn't care. Adrenaline would spike, heart rate would increase, fight or flight would kick in. That kind of chronic stress takes a toll. For soldiers who served in Desert Storm, the MOPP gear is an indelible memory. The rubber smell, the claustrophobia, the heat, the difficulty doing simple tasks while suited up, and underlying it all, the fear. The training said if you heard gas, 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 you had 9 seconds to get your mask on or you'd die. 9 seconds between life and death. That's a lot of pressure to live with for 43 days. If you served in Desert Storm and dealt with chemical weapons preparation, or if you remember the fear of Scuds carrying chemical warheads, leave a comment below. The fact that chemical weapons were never used doesn't mean the threat wasn't real. The fear shaped the entire war experience for hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. The chemical weapons that never came were still one of Desert Storm's defining elements. Every soldier prepared for them. Every family worried about them. Every strategic decision factored them in. Saddam's chemical arsenal hung over the war like a dark cloud that thankfully never broke. But the psychological impact, the fear, the preparation, the constant alerts, that was very real and affected everyone who served. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We're telling the complete story of Desert Storm, including the invisible psychological battles that don't show up in highlight reels of tank battles and airstrikes. I'll see you in the next one.